Hi everyone, David Fazzino here, and welcome to Screencast Part 2 for Poverty and Wealth, Measures of Wealth and Poverty, as part of the playlist for Anthropology and World Problems being offered at Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania. So let's get right into some of these measures. At the international level, you have the United Nations Human Development Index, which measures a number of different aspects or dimensions: long and healthy life, knowledge, a decent standard of living. The indicators: life expectancy at birth for long and healthy life, life expectancy index; knowledge, expected years of schooling and mean years of schooling; and then a decent standard of living. And so in further defining these terms, the report uses some specific language that I'll go over here. Life expectancy at birth: this is the number of years a newborn infant can expect to live if prevailing patterns of age-specific mortality rates at the time of birth stay the same throughout the infant's life. The expected years of schooling: this is the number of years of schooling that a child of school entrance age can expect to receive if prevailing patterns of age-specific enrollment rates persist throughout the child's life. And then the mean years of schooling: the average number of years of education received by people ages 25 and older converted from educational attainment levels using official durations at each level. PPP is purchasing power parity, which I'll explain in the next couple of slides, along with the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So purchasing power parity: this is a theoretical exchange rate that allows you to buy the same goods, same amount of goods and services in every country. It is, as an example, if you want to live inexpensively, you can move to any country in the world and compare prices of basically any good or product sold. Government agencies will use this to compare the output of countries that use different exchange rates. The OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's comprised of 38 nations in Europe, the Americas, and the Pacific. Helps member countries to formulate economic and social policies. And a key thing here is that members and key partners represent 80% of world trade. There are a number of key partners that do not meet all the requirements for entrance, but nevertheless contribute to this 80% number. It aids developing countries outside membership and promotes reform overall. So looking at things like economics as well as educational attainment. This was initially the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, which existed between 1948 and 1960. This was part of the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe post-World War II. The OECD was founded in 1961 with a number of non-European countries joining. It includes 26 countries today from Europe, 6 from the Americas, 4 from the Pacific, and 2 from the Middle East. Nations that are seeking membership are reviewed by members. These nations must comply with economic reform standards, which include corporate governance, anti-corruption, and environmental protection. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reviews members every 1 to 2 years and makes recommendations, including potentially austerity adjustment measures, cutting back on spending overall at the government level. The human development groups, and this is from the Human Development Index, you have very high human development at the end. So you can see the relative metrics here. So Human Development Index is here. Inequality adjusted Human Development Index accounts for the contrast within particular countries, and we'll see the implications of that. So you see the numbers dropping down due to inequality that's present in a given country, or potentially also in a given region. Life expectancy: here you can see that the clear association with human development and life expectancy at birth. Expected years of schooling: again, the downward trend as you go from very high human development to countries under the United Nations Human Development Index that are indicated as low human development. And then the mean years of schooling, and then the gross national income per capita, and this goes back here to the purchasing power parity amount. So there's a standardized metric across the board. In terms of very high human development, This is the most recent information as of this recording. For Human Development Index, countries ranked in order here. Norway first, followed by Ireland, Switzerland, Hong Kong, and Iceland tied for number 4. But if you look in terms of the income adjusted Human Development Index, you can see that Hong Kong drops a number of spots here because of the inequality that's present there. For comparative purposes, and since this course is being offered in the United States, I've also put the United States on here. It's ranked 17th, but you can also see the severe drop that occurs in the United States due to income inequality in the country within the United States. Also notable is the life expectancy, mean years of schooling, expected years of schooling, and then the per capita, again measured by purchasing power parity. That's for very high human development under the Human Development Index. The United Nations Human Development Index also basically lists and goes through all of the countries in the world and ranks them. And here you can see Niger is ranked at the very bottom here in terms of the Human Development Index. But interestingly enough, if we look at inequality adjusted Human Development Index, we can see here that it's not necessarily the lowest country in the world. Overall is the Central African Republic, but actually replace it at the bottom list. And a number of the countries here, including South Sudan and Chad, would be further down if we were accounting for inequality in a given country. You can see life expectancy rates here. Just a comparison between these countries here at the bottom and the top of life expectancy, 53.3 years for the Central African Republic, and just compare this here, life expectancy 82.4 in Norway. So almost 3 decades of difference in life expectancy. The same could be said with pretty gross disparities in terms of expected and mean years of schooling, and then purchasing power parity as well. Here we're into just the hundreds rather than thousands with the Central African Republic at 993 US dollars, the purchasing power parity. Income inequality in country is again something we've mentioned, and that it certainly impacts the United States, and we'll talk more specifically about the United States in some of the upcoming slides. But here you can see the Gini index or Gini coefficient. The higher the number, the worse it is, or the greater the disparity between the rich and the poor within a given country. So the statistic overall shows a ranking of the estimated worldwide Gini index in 2020. Differentiated by country. Gini coefficient here measures the degree of income equality on a scale from 0, total equality of incomes, to 1, total inequality. And this is also shown by a percentage, which is how it's represented here on the Gini index. This comes from Statista's 2021 ranking of Gini index by country 2020. You can see at the very top again, South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, Mozambique, and Botswana in the top 5, and then the rank on the other end of the spectrum, Azerbaijan, Slovenia, Slovakia, Moldova, and Czechia. So these are on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of income parity within a given country. The U.S. has the highest level of income inequality, and this is from 2020, Katherine Schaeffwer's work, 6 Facts About Income Inequality in the United States. And basically this draws from a number of studies from Pew Research Center. Again, the Gini coefficient in the United States is highest amongst G7 countries. In the United States, too, race plays a big role in this, with black and white income gap holding steady since 1970. This is median household income in US 2018 US dollars. The gaps in income between upper income and middle and lower income households are rising, and the share held by middle income households is falling. And so you can see this trend as of 2018 dollars in share of the overall US aggregate wealth. So again, distribution within country upper income countries replacing, or upper income individuals in the United States replacing middle income in terms of highest percentage of U.S. aggregate income, and then lower income just 10 to 9 between 1970 and 2018. So actually a lower share overall of aggregate income globally. And this comes from the 2016 Poverty and Shared Prosperity Report, Taking on Inequality. What we see here is an increase in the Gini index, basically from 1820, and you can think about the historical rise of capitalism here, all the way up until fairly recently, and then more recent reporting of a decline in the Gini index overall. The trends in the average national Gini by region, again, you can see regional breakdown here, Sub-Saharan Africa represented, Latin America and Caribbean on the top as well. Taking a look at the national income share of the richest 1% of selected countries, and again, here you can see the United States disproportionately represented in terms of the 1%. This has led to lots of discussions about we are the 99%, the 1% in the United States. And then the discussion here with the developing economies since 1980, again, South Africa, very highly represented here. There had been a fair amount of progress made in the last number of years. Since I began teaching this class, it was generally bad, and then things started turning around, but of course that was pre the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is the international poverty line at $1.90 a day, or abject poverty. And so the forecasts are basically predicting an uptick because of COVID-19 pandemic and economic responses to that overall. So the impact of COVID-19 on the international poverty line, although global poverty has more recently resumed its pre-pandemic downward trajectory, between 75 and 95 million additional people could be living in extreme poverty in 2022 compared to pre-COVID projections due to the lingering effects of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and rising inflation. Food inflation can have particularly devastating impact on poor families, with a typical person in a low-income country spending about 2/3 of their resources on food, while the same figure for the typical person in a high-income country is closer to 25%. Research suggests that the effects of the current crisis will almost certainly be felt in most countries through 2030. Under these conditions, the goal of bringing the global absolute poverty rate of $1.90 or international poverty line to less than 3% by 2030, which was already at risk before the pandemic, is now beyond reach unless countries take swift, significant, and substantial policy action. This comes from the World Bank's 2022 Poverty Overview webpage. We can see the global poverty rate, and again, this comes from World Bank 2020 Reversals of Fortune report, is measured at different levels. So this at the absolute $1.90, and then they have two other measures here of absolute poverty, right? And then so we can see that particularly here in terms of the number of poor, in terms of millions or thousands of millions or billions, very little has happened here at this higher level, whereas this rate was falling but is again threatened by the COVID-19 pandemic. So the World Bank's priority remains on eradicating extreme poverty, the international poverty line. However, achieving the vital goal of lifting all people above the threshold will not end poverty. And again, this is according to the World Bank itself, as poverty evolves as countries grow and develop. About a quarter of the global population is living below the $3.20 poverty line, and almost half is living below the $5.50 line, compared to less than 10% living below the $1.90 abject poverty. These figures translate to 1.8 billion people and 3.3 billion at the 320 and 550 poverty levels, respectively. The number of people living below 320 is as high as the number of people in extreme poverty in 1990. And the number of people living below 550 per person today has barely changed over the past 25 years.